You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. You can continue this season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first dollar bet. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, our Locked On Hawks Postcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Hawks made a stop in Texas tonight, but we'll take you back to Vegas for a minute to good Trae Young. And despite what we saw tonight, we'll also download on the body of work that might send a couple Hawks to Golden State. But first, let's talk takes on the Hawks starting their post-Cup campaign with a thud of a loss, 133-126 to the San Antonio Spurs in overtime. And Tate, you said your take was the Hawks played like they didn't have anything to play for.
No doubt, and I was afraid that this was something that could potentially happen. And again, I think the main thing is making sure the Hawks are staying hungry and staying confident, still got the chip on their shoulder. I think they may have, not putting, words in their mouth, but the kind of, I always talk about the vibe, the feel, the energy, those things. The way they came out tonight was almost to seem like, yeah, y'all been seeing the way that we've been playing lately. Y'all see that, we made our run to the cup, and, we've been one of the hottest talked about teams in the NBA over the course of the last 2 weeks or so along those lines. So I feel like it's not even just, and I was thinking about this, it's not even just about the fact that I think San Antonio wanted it more. I think that they were just fearless. They knew that that the Atlanta Hawks could be a team that was vulnerable enough to allow them to stay in the game. And if that was the case, then they could win the game. Like, that's what it felt like to me. It felt like this game was not, it didn't feel like the game was nearly as important. It didn't feel like a must win, where I don't think the Hawks can really afford to be in positions to where they're entering games and playing as if optically it looks like it's not a must win type of game, with the one exception probably being Larry Nance and the way that he contributed tonight, and the dunk that DeAndre Hunter had over Vicor Wembanyama. With those two exceptions, it just really felt much. I mean, think about something. Down the stretch, going into overtime, we've seen a bad shot by Trey. We'll talk about that later. And then to follow that up with the fact that he went to the free throw line and blew 2 free throws. Follow that up by a turnover that led into a basket by an opposing player off of that turnover. And I really think that the focus really should have been, and partially some of this could be on the coaching staff, is that I hope the assignment was to allow Vicor Wembanyama to get his, just don't let everybody else pitch in, because everybody else ended up pitching in tonight. And ultimately, that's why the Spurs are the victors.
Yeah. And thinking about, and speaking of Larry Nance Jr., I was saying to myself, wow, for once, there's the random role player on the Hawks side that actually made the difference, because obviously Larry Nance coming off the bench, playing 31 minutes. And granted, some of that is because of some of the shifts in who is available for the Hawks, but 21 points in 31 minutes, 8 of 13 shooting from the field, and 13 rebounds. I would say Larry Nance had himself a night, and it was nice that a random role player was on this side as opposed to the other. Unfortunately, didn't make the difference that it needed to, which was to get a win, but that's also not Larry Nance's fault, by the way. And as you mentioned, DeAndre Hunter heated up at just the right time. He was kind of struggling through the first half and even through the third quarter, and really started to come alive in the fourth quarter. And all for naught, you could definitely question whether or not there was a blown call on his dunk. Yes, there was. We'll see what that 2-minute report says. But ultimately, you don't want it to even get to that point, because really you kind of traded quarters the first half, and the Hawks were still up by 6 because San Antonio won the first quarter, Hawks won the second quarter by almost the same differential. But then you come to that pesky third quarter. And I think, to your earlier point, that's where we didn't see the energy that you needed in order to withstand what you knew was coming, which was the Spurs were going to try to get back in this game and then try to take it over. So that 6-point lead that the Hawks took into halftime, it was immediately wiped away by a 7-0 run that was aided by the very things that you mentioned, really the very thing that you mentioned, which was turnovers.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I really, really am trying to say this nicely, but let's just say you can't play Captain Save a you-know-what every single time, because it doesn't have to be the same person saving the team every single time. When there's 8 seconds on the clock, I don't care if you can't take a timeout because there was a challenge on the floor and you won the challenge, but you lost the timeout. You guys are veterans. And there should have been a situation where at least 2 plays were drawn up in advance, should you have gotten the ball back, to give you an opportunity to win. There's no way with 8.2 seconds on the clock that you shouldn't have an opportunity for 2 shots. I mean, think about that. Think about if someone had shot the 3 and there was a defender waiting for the long rebound just in case it didn't go in, and so that it wouldn't go down the other 94 feet, right? Or say there was somebody who went in for a dunk, went in for a layup, a bunny, and they missed that, but somebody could have been under the rim to pop it right back in. But we never got a chance to see that, because other than Jaylen Johnson inbounding the ball, nobody else really touched it for 8.2 seconds.
Yeah.
And we just talked about Larry Nance Jr. being hot. We just talked about DeAndre Hunter being hot. As great as it is to see a stat line, and we'll go back to some of the positives of this kind of stat line a little bit later. So as great as it is to see a stat line that includes 16 assists for Trae Young, is, to me, and 23 points, but to me, that's offset with the fact that you had 5 turnovers.
Yeah.
And those turnovers weren't just 5 turnovers. They were turnovers at critical junctures.
Sure.
And that makes all the difference. So for me, I don't want that Trae Young to keep showing up. I want the one who has been with the Hawks through 7 wins in the last 10 games. I want that guy to be the Trae that we see more often than not the guy that we saw here. I had seen in the last few weeks a Trae Young that looked like he trusted his teammates. Trust him all 48 minutes. That includes the last 8 seconds of a game, especially because whatever took Trae into the locker room, because he was away from the court for a minute, and I know I didn't get a report or see a report that talked about what he did. Maybe he just got taped up or something, because he did come back, but he also came back and we saw that he really wasn't shooting like he was earlier in the game, thus the missed free throws. So if you know that you might not be 100%, then you got to give somebody else an opportunity to take that shot and get you out of there, because I knew going to overtime on the road with this pesky little Spurs team that fought their way back into this game, I knew that wasn't going to be good.
Well, I know we did get to a point where Trae did attempt a 3-pointer over in the corner and then happened to land on one of the opposing players' foot. And of course, that's what, had him on the ground and everything else. And of course, he had to keep on playing. God knows what that would have even looked like without Trae. Love the fact that he powered through it, I guess. Because they didn't have a Kobe
he was gone
Buffkin.
for a minute. So, he was gone for quite a while. So
Right. And I mean, like I said, they didn't have Kobe Buffkin on tonight, which is a whole different situation. And that's something else that I think didn't help the situation with not being able to sit Trae when they may have needed to or would have any other time. But it is one of those things where we have seen this evolution or what have you of Trae, where he plays a little bit different than he had before. It looks like he trusts his teammates more and everything else. Some of that stuff, I feel like at some point, could that be a bad thing? I don't love the idea that everybody knows where the ball is going.
Exactly.
Yet again, after we've seen what it looked like against Milwaukee with Giannis on him for a game-winning shot, and pretty much looked like just about doggone near the same play. 2 of probably the longest wingspans in the NBA defending you, and then you go for yet another sidestep jump shot over a much taller defender. I'm not in love. I'm not in love with the idea. And that's where I think he has to be better. I think that's where the coaching staff needs to make sure that he's not put in a position on an island all by himself like that again. And there's some other little small minor details as well that I just hope that we're not talking about going into this game in just 48 hours from now having the same conversation.
Yeah, you don't want to have those kinds of miscues, because it took the Spurs the entirety of the game and then some for them to be able to take advantage of it. 48 and an additional 5, the bonus. But let's just say the Grizzlies don't need that kind of time. If you saw the waxing that they
Yeah.
gave the Warriors, they put on them in Memphis tonight, you
Jesus
just don't
Christ.
want that smoke Saturday. So you got to be ready for them. But anywho, the Hawks, their quest for a title fell just short a couple days ago, but there were still some good things that came out of Vegas. So we'll take you back there for a moment and we'll break that down in the end one. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by Built Rewards. Today's episode is, again, sponsored by Built. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. So earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points towards flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in the program, the possibilities are endless, and you can access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. So start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. I know that the community I live in, we are absolutely given that opportunity to take advantage of Built. So maybe it's something that I'll take advantage of. I encourage you to do the same, and make sure you use the link joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba so they know we sent you, and don't wait. Start earning your rewards today. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this whole holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier, and it filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And they have a lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today, because what time is it? It is game time. So we'll take it back to something happier, which was the Hawks making it to the semifinals of the NBA Cup. And the NBA announced the 2024 All-Cup, All-Tournament team earlier today. Trae Young was one of 5 players who made that team. That included Giannis Antetokounmpo, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Damian Lillard, and Alperen Sengun. How good was it to see Trae's name, especially alongside the likes of Giannis, an MVP, SGA, an MVP type, Dame Lillard, an MVP type?
I think it was good. And to be honest with you, I thought that it was expected. The way that he has been played, the kind of run that they have been on, the type of cup games that they have had to win in order to be in this position. I don't think so much of this is just necessarily about, maybe what they did in the games once they got to Vegas, but what got them there, how big those teams had to be, or players had to be, especially Trae. Because you remember, on the way to that point was I think the very first cup game was a big time win against the Celtics. I think it was when they ended up beating the Celtics. They had to be big for that one. I think one of those other ones may have been Cleveland, and just a few others. So, I think it's good to see Trae in that position, and not just Trae. I hate that he was so much singled out for that. I understand that only probably one guy was going to get the nod from the Hawks. But DeAndre Hunter was a huge piece to that team on their run and the things that they have been doing. Jaylen Johnson was huge for the team on their run in the quest for the cup. So I get it. It's going to end up being Trey unless, we're talking about one of those other guys going for something, just shy of 100 points. And I say that facetiously, of course, but I think it was still overall good to put him in that conversation because I thought that it was very much deserving and he was worthy of it.
Yeah, definitely. When you look at him being the only player to average at least 20 points, 10 assists, and a steal in the cup games, you absolutely know that he deserved that. But like you said, to get there, the way that this team was playing, truly playing complementary basketball, you know that they could not have gotten to the semifinals without this being a team effort, especially because we know where they came from in the early month or the early weeks of this 2024-25 season. And it really looked like, wow, we don't know what this team is going to be by the end of this season. But now it seems like they're starting to form. And when the good trade shows up, that usually is a positive for this team all the way around, so that you see 20 points, 10 assists, and a steal, averaging that, but you know that it was actually 20 good points. And when I say good points, meaning that that's spread out across, because he's taking the shots, but he's also looking to help his teammates be scorers as well. And that's when I like him to be in the rhythm. And when you're out getting 20 points and 10 assists, 9 times out of 10, you're not turning that ball over nearly as much as you saw Trey turn that ball over tonight. And obviously you're making decisions, better decisions than we maybe saw in the waning minutes of tonight's game. Now, that said, there may also have been another reason that maybe this game didn't quite play out like we'd hoped it would, maybe even thought that it would, because the last 24 hours have not been good for the Hawks. The Hawks had been relatively healthy, especially through that stretch where they won 6 in a row or 5 in a row, and obviously before tonight's loss. But the team announced that Onyeka Okongwu will be out for the next 4 games due to left knee inflammation. Kobe Buffkin will undergo surgery to deal with, lingering shoulder issues, likely done for the season. So those are 2 big losses, because we know Double O is the one where if no one else can get after some of those marquee players like Giannis, we know that he can, or players like Victor Wembanyama, because he's a little more athletic and he has the ability to at least try to get out there as a big and take him on when he's delivering from 3. So you definitely missed that presence for Double O tonight. And with a Kobe, those are minutes that are so critical for Trey, especially when he takes that break at the end of the first quarter and sometimes going into the second quarter. So no Kobe Buffkin for there, but starting with Double O. Obviously, they played the Spurs tonight. They'll get the Grizzlies Saturday. Then it's the Wolves. Then they'll take a couple of days off and they'll play the Bulls. Those are the 4 games that at a minimum Double O will not be available for. So how much of a loss is that for the Hawks?
Well, I think first of all, you'll be a fool to think that you're going to get, someone like someone like a Larry Nance to come in and give what he gave on tonight, or to replace what Onyeka Okongwu has been given. Because besides DeAndre Hunter, the guy that I have been speaking the most harshly about has been Onyeka Okongwu. I get a different Onyeka Okongwu against the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo than I typically get out of playing any of the other 28 teams that they have to play. That being said, we mentioned a couple guys we're talking about, Jaylen Johnson and DeAndre Hunter and the quest to the cup and all that kind of stuff. Well, Onyeka Okongwu was a big piece of that coming off the bench. He's also been a big piece to the contribution off the bench. I think they're averaging somewhere around 40-something points, third most off the bench for any in the NBA right now. And he's been a big piece of that. And if you haven't been knowing leading up to this season, Onyeka Okongwu has not been the offensive threat that we have seen this year. So it's like finally when he kind of gets it going and add that offensive piece to his game, even stepping out, hitting some jump shots every now and then from the perimeter, then he goes down with an injury. Obviously, that's something that is very, very unfortunate. Obviously, with Buffkin going down, the part that really hurts is the fact that that is one of arguably the most important, position on the floor is the point guard position. And when you got somebody like Trey, God forbid, goes down with an injury similar to what he had tonight, it kind of scares you a little bit because you don't know where you're going. I don't know if they're calling guys up. I don't know if they're bringing guys over. I don't know what they're doing. but it is definitely a concerning thing. Not having Onyeka is a serious hiccup. And I just want to mention this one last thing too, Tenitra.
Mm-hmm.
Onyeka hasn't, and this team hasn't just been doing this against any old teams. Every team that hadn't been, the New Orleans Pelicans. Think about something. They played against Giannis. They played LeBron. They played Joker. They played Brunson. After that was Giannis again. Victor on tonight. Ja is coming up next. Ant-Man is after that. So, like, there's some really big names and big pieces that they have been, fortunately or unfortunately having to face in some really tough moments where the Hawks still have some things to kind of figure out.
Yeah, because when you kind of look at the possibility, because technically Beat Krejci can go shooting guard or point guard, but you know how I feel about him and his leakiness, if you will.
Sure.
Definitely a defensive liability, but on the offensive side of the ball, I've seen him, just like tonight, pretty much not give the team anything. So you're looking up and down that bench and you're thinking to yourself, like, whoa, whenever the opportunity presents itself, sooner rather than later, Landry Fields, go to work, because you're probably going to need to bring somebody in here. And that might not be a bad thing, because I do still feel like they need an assassin coming off the bench. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is later, because we know that even tonight, this team started off where the Hawks were 8 of 17. So they're shooting from three nearly 50% in the first half. But then the final stat line for them from the 3-point line is more like 42%. Not bad, but still not what you saw in the first half. Meanwhile, the Spurs flipped it. They had a poor shooting half from the perimeter, 33%, but they end the game with 45% shooting from three. The Hawks are going to have to figure out that problem sooner or later from the perimeter. Now, the Hawks absolutely have some opportunities to maybe make their way. You saw them make their way to Vegas. Maybe a couple of them have their opportunity to make their way to Golden State. We'll talk about that and who got next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Who knows? You may get a hunch in the middle of the game, or even at the beginning of the game before the Atlanta Falcons take on the New York Giants. You may know that the line shift from -10.5 when the Falcons announced that Michael Penix Jr. was taking over under center, but the line is still -8.5. That's still a good look. But if it changes, you know where to go. FanDuel.com. Join today and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So AllStar voting started today. And again, take tonight's game out of your head for just a moment when it comes to Trey. But obviously, his turn in the Cup tournament and the run he helped put the Hawks on as of late, again, minus tonight, is he maybe starting to make the case for a voting-based return to being an All-Star?
I think so, Tenitra. Not only being the guy that's leading the NBA in assists, I think there's a couple other things. The consistency for him. This is being his third consecutive season, averaging 20 plus points, 10 plus assists. That's amongst, only 6 others in the NBA that have done such things. And of course, all the other stuff goes on and on for most assists consecutively and most points consecutively and so forth. But to me, that stuff holds weight. I think sometimes without him necessarily being a fan favorite to a degree, doesn't necessarily help him all the time just from the fan aspect. And I know that there's a lot of kids who tend to like Trae Young and whatever else, what have you, the villain role and everything else that comes along with that. But I don't know. I think I just kind of got to look to see, who else maybe in the East put a little bit more thought into it, especially from a point guard perspective. But if not nothing else, then certainly for one of the reserve roles. And remember, I'll be curious to know how this kind of shakes out, because I remember on last year, he was one of the biggest names, if not the biggest name, that felt like they were probably snubbed off of the All-Star last year. And then all of a sudden, I think somebody got hurt or whatever the case may be. Now his phone rings, and of course he's a part of it. And of course, if you're him, you can't really turn down that opportunity. But if it doesn't make you look bad, you almost want to turn down that opportunity so you can make everybody pay for not picking you up. But I think he's just on the surface level, without diving really deep into, who and who not and things of that nature. I think for the most part, he's there, and I think that he would deserve to be a reserve this year for the East.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not so much of whether or not, who he's stacked up against. It's more of saying, has he built the case for himself to be someone who should be strongly considered when the voters go in to vote? I think so as well. And I think that what he needs to continue to do is play team-oriented ball. So we need to see more of what we saw from Trey in the Cup as opposed to tonight, because as quiet as it's kept, those are the types of things that people point to. Those are the types of things that fans point to or other players point to. It's not necessarily fair because that is a small sample size, but that is what that is. Whereas people were really starting to like the Trey that they had seen during this run. And hopefully we know they're going into a tough gauntlet of games, but hopefully you'll still see him continue to be that guy. And another guy, not so much looking at those who play at Jaylen Johnson's position, no, not looking across the fours, across the Eastern Conference, but more so, or the league overall, but more so looking at Jaylen, saying, has he made the case to be considered amongst the elite at the four?
Considered, sure. I think that is fair. I remember we had a very similar conversation some years back, maybe a handful or so, however many. And I think that John Collins was somewhere right around that same cusp where it was like, does this dude deserve some consideration too? Because and it just reminded me of the similar impact. There was consistency there, and that's where the whole, maybe they're not, Anthony Davis and LeBron tier worthy. But that next tier, that they look pretty freaking good, especially with the lobs and the athleticism and all the stuff that comes along with it. Jaylen Johnson reminds me of that step that was taken, or that extra leap in that next year, similar to the way Collins did. And I think he ended up competing for the dunk contest instead. Neither here nor there. Consideration. Yeah. I don't think there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and at least at this point in the season, for what we've seen thus far. One more thing before we wrap up. Speaking of the All-Star Game, there's been so much commentary, and it was maybe even more of a hot topic than the Cup tournament itself during the Cup tournament, and that was Adam Silver and the NBA's decision to yet again remix the All-Star Game. And it's like, literally, Kevin Durant said he thinks it's the dumbest thing. He absolutely hates it. He doesn't understand why you have this whole format where it's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to get this team to play and that team to play, and then we're going to get another team to play, and then the team that wins the Rising Stars Challenge, they're going to be in the mix, and that's how we're going to mix this thing up. I'm not sure that's the answer to the problem that the NBA has when it comes to the All-Star Game. I don't think that's the solution.
No, I mean, I think that it's given desperate a little bit of a feel. Yes. I get it. NFL's playing football on Christmas Day now. I get it that, the NBA is trying to do some things with the Cup and all that kind of stuff, and the viewership being whatever that was. I'm okay with it because the Hawks were participating in, so they're going to get my vote. Plus it's basketball, so they're going to get my vote anyway. But I'm not sure that that's really the direction. Some of it is just kind of given the desperate feel, like we're willing to do any and all things, whatever it takes to put more eyeballs on it. I'm gonna be honest with you, when it comes to All-Star Weekend in general, and I know that this isn't necessarily talking about the actual game per se, but just when it comes to All-Star Weekend, it's feeling a little watered down. people are tired of seeing guys really not playing defense out there. I know they tried to add an extra element with the trophy and everything else, the Kobe stuff and the Michael Jordan stuff and everything else. And I guess all of that is fine or what have you, but I've been to All-Star Weekend and I've been to Las Vegas for Summer League. And if people haven't been, Vegas Summer League is quickly taking over any and everything that All-Star Weekend has become, especially and respectfully, if those All-Star Weekends are taking places in like Cleveland and Indiana and Utah and things like that.
Yeah.
Trying something new and just looking for change. I don't think that's bad per se. However, I will say sometimes it's just not a good thing to be trying to add so many things within the course of just 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
It's overdoing it a little bit for me. It's overkill.
Yeah, and maybe they should take a lesson from the NFL as well. The NFL does not they don't mince words when it comes to where they're going to put the Super Bowl. Point blank. They're not trying to put it in all 32 markets. Never going to happen. The only reason Detroit got a Super Bowl was because there was a whole hurricane in New Orleans, Louisiana in 2005. Right. The NFL, they get it, and they always know how to make those strategic moves. Now, there are some things that the association does better than the NFL as well, but this ain't it. This is not it. I mean, KD had his comments, and then LeBron came back today with his comments and said, hey, looking at this format, going away from the traditional East-West game, and now you're going to have the teams drafted by the top 2 vote getters in the conference. Then, like I said, you're going round robin. He said, yeah, something had to change, but on the same token, he said, we'll see. When we get there, not a fan. Anthony Davis said, I don't really like it, and I have to co-sign with those guys as well. I'm not sure that this is going to be it, but I also know 397 points in a game ain't it either. So we'll see how this plays out. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We'll see you Saturday night.